and welcome to Finextra TV. I'm Hannah Wallace and we're here at the Merchants Payments Ecosystem 2020 in Berlin. Kindly joining me now is Andrew Cregan from British Retail Consortium and Boris Kreisinger from Hugo Boss. Hello gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me.
So the first thing I want to ask you, and sort of set the scene really, could you highlight some of the challenges we're seeing merchants face in the payments industry today? And we'll start with you, yeah.
Well, I'd say the challenges that merchants face this year are probably best summed up in four different categories, really. Some of these are ongoing and some of them are newer challenges, but for merchants to operate in a face-to-face environment, access to cash, whether or not their customers can get hold of cash, is a big issue that seems to be getting worse as people are using less and less cash. There's also alternatives to digital payments that are emerging now in the open banking space. We need to do what we can to be able to foster that, ensure that it's a credible alternative to card payments, so that it launches to be something that is a big player in the payments world. But as it stands today, and these other two priorities and big hurdles for merchants are around the card payments industry, and we still have 80% of customers paying for their goods or services in the retail industry by card. So we have strong customer authentication coming in at the end of this year across Europe, or in the UK in March 2021. That means there's an awful lot of work to do to ensure that people can continue to pay for goods online as strong customer authentication comes into effect, and to ensure that businesses can continue to sell. But then there's the cost of card payments as well, and this is something that's been a long-standing concern and was partly tackled by the Interchange fee regulation. That's being reviewed this year by the European Commission, but we need to see some strong action to ensure that regulation is fit for purpose as we go forward into the future.
So that sort of regulation, what about standardisation? That's a pretty challenging area as well for merchants, no?
I would say so, but I would say that when it comes to standardisation, it's a possible lack of standards that is going to present the biggest obstacles here. So when we're talking about particularly alternatives to card payments, we're talking about open banking, we're talking about open banking standards. What we need to see in the UK and across Europe is a set of standards that create a level playing field, so as many participants can enter this new open banking space as possible, but most importantly, that customers will know what to expect when they're going through this new channel. There's some kind of trust that can develop through an understood customer journey with this new open banking customer journey, whichever company that you happen to be working with, whether that be Trustly, whether that be Pay by Bank, whether that be Pay with Bank Transfer. That needs to be a well understood customer journey, and we also need to develop the customer protections for that as well. That requires standards, and there is a potential there is a potential hazard here whereby we use competition as a reason not to introduce standards, and actually that leads to the whole marketplace being something that can't develop in the sense that it needs to create a level playing field.
I see. Well, thank you for that, Andrew. And Boris, as head of payments at Hugo Boss, if that's right.
Yeah.
From your experience and as a more broader view, what challenges are you seeing merchants face in the retail space?
Well, generally, the whole topic of payment is a very, at the moment, fast evolving industry. So from a merchant perspective, it's somehow really challenging to keep up with the pace, with the pace of innovation, with the pace of new payment methods, and things are coming up, especially when you are on a global scale. So a lot of things are developing domestically in markets. So when you have somehow central knowledge, it's somehow difficult to keep up with the pace. So there is a Swish developing in Sweden. There are other local things are developing. You have to cope with your customers globally, yeah. But there are so many new things to cover. This was easy in the past. So basically, you had card business. You had offered cards in your stores. That was it. Fine, customer was satisfied.
More complicated today.
And it's getting more and more complicated. And on the other hand, there was this thing called omnichannel, which came in. So the amount of access points for the customers multiplied. And the thing is, you have now way more touch points where payment is happening. And you have to align these touch points, and this really drove complexity in terms of implementation. So, which is also some kind of my message, that innovation in payment is also in some instances expensive for merchants, and I think that's a big hurdle for merchants.
Coming to MIF regulation, since MIF regulation on interchanges, do you think that we need scheme fee regulation now in place?
Well, just looking back a few years on the MIF regulation, so just from a merchant perspective in Europe, this was definitely a success. So credit card fees on average heavily came down. So of course this was a great thing for merchants. And now I've just recently read some articles now where there is this study on how successful was it from the European Central Bank, and the study somehow is saying, well, it was very successful and the savings for customers and merchants were tremendous. But on the other hand, we are seeing that somehow the interchange regulation, they targeted the issuing banks, all good. But from a merchant perspective, you see that there's nearly no week is going by where somewhere on the planet scheme fees are increased by Visa or MasterCard. So this week in France, next week in the UK, the week after in Germany. So in the end, this does not really bring really the high percentages. Nonetheless, we are seeing constantly increasing scheme fees from a side where I do think we have a lack of competition, because there is Visa and Master, there are these big players, they can do it. So that's why we have really seen increasing scheme fees, and I think also that it's valid to discuss about regulation, although personally my opinion is it would be always better if this is regulated by competition rather than regulation. But the thing is, at the moment, I do not really see the players who could compete with Visa and Master in this field. Yeah. So that's why I think this topic comes into play.
All right. Well, talk me through this road to Interchange Zero. What is it? Tell us our audience, and whether it's desirable for merchants going forward.
Well, also in the past months, I already heard about the things. So, do we need a further regulation on interchange fees and coming down from this 0.3 or 0.2? So, of course, just from a merchant perspective, I would say, well, great, even lower costs. But on the other hand, you really have to consider, well, there must be a player on the market who pays the bill. So that's the topic, and the question is, if interchanges would come down to zero or nearly zero, who is paying the bill then? And I know there are already solutions on the market to say, well, you get acceptance for free if you are if your sourcing department is using my commercial cards, and then another one is paying. So I do not really personally, I do not really like the idea that you bring down fees at one point and increasing fees on another point, and this is always it would make things even more complicated. So that's why I think you need to be carefully looking into the thing when you want to decrease interchange fees. Although you see that there are markets in Europe with domestic schemes where interchanges are way below the 0.2 or 0.3 we are seeing, but nonetheless, I think it's not just that easy thing to say bring it down and that's it.
All right, well then, finally then, looking towards the future, the sort of crystal ball question as it were, what's the next round of merchant payments innovation, and where are we likely to see it come from, Angela?
Well, I'd very much see that coming from the open banking space. Now, of course, PSD2, the Revised Payment Services Directive, has opened up the opportunity for new players, new solutions to move into the payments market, but they still have a long way to go, I think, before they reach the point where they will be or can be adopted en masse by consumers and retailers alike. The functionality isn't quite there today for example, refunds at the moment can't be processed by a number of payment initiation service providers. This is a very basic functionality that we would expect to see on payment cards today, but there's also aspects of what we use our payment cards for that you can't use in open banking. So I might use my payment card to pay for things face-to-face, to pay for things online, but also in London I might use it to tap in and out of the tube as my bus pass as well. Now, that's not something that is going to be possible with a lot of payment initiation service providers unless we move into there's a physical factor, essentially a card form to go along with it. That's something that needs to develop, and also the consumer protections as well. So there's still quite some way for it to go, but it's important that there's also some kind of trust mark that sits around this, and I know the Open Banking Implementation Entity in the UK are looking at developing this, but retailers and consumers, more to the point, must understand that what they're using is a platform where they can expect a set customer journey, set customer experience, and the protections that go along with that need to all be demonstrated in a logo and a trust mark that they can all understand, this is what this means for me.
No, so you certainly painted the picture there, and it's definitely a space to keep an eye on. Boris, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'll let you get back to the event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.